Superman, son of Kal-El. DC was looking to shake things up. In 2021, they handed the Superman mantle to John Kent, Clark's teenage son, and made headlines almost instantly. Before readers even cracked open issue number 1, the news cycle was buzzing. John Kent would be revealed as bisexual. Mainstream outlets ran it everywhere, and the book's first issues got a sales boost from the attention. But after that initial splash, things fell apart fast. Readers jumped in expecting thrilling superhero adventures, and what they found was John attending climate protests and arguing about social activism. Fan criticism piled up quickly, not because John was bisexual, but because the writing felt flat and the storytelling thin. John spent more time giving lectures than punching villains, and longtime Superman fans felt like they were watching the world's strongest superhero get bogged down in mundane politics. By issue 3, sales were sliding, and by the end of its run in late 2022, the series was essentially limping to cancellation. The plots never clicked with fans, and no real villains or memorable arcs ever emerged. Even the action scenes felt sparse and underwhelming. Strangely, critics praised it throughout, calling it brave and important. But on the shelves, readers disappeared fast. The result was a run that DC seemed eager to quietly shelve, moving John Kent out of the spotlight soon after. And just to twist the knife, John Kent's short-lived time as Superman ended up overshadowed by Clark Kent's return, the original Superman taking his title right back. The experiment didn't last long. John still shows up in DC stories today, but his big moment as the Superman became one of the most short-lived torch passings in comic history. The United States of Captain America. This comic was supposed to be a celebration. Marvel put Steve Rogers back on the road, traveling across America to reconnect with the country, but this time, he wasn't alone. The hook? Along the way, Steve would meet a lineup of local Captain Americas, ordinary people who represented communities from every corner of the country. Sounds like a creative way to honor Cap's legacy, at least on paper, but readers didn't exactly salute. From the very first issue, fan backlash was loud. The writing came under fire for feeling clunky, stuffed with awkward dialogue, and paper-thin characters who seemed written as walking symbols rather than believable people. The most talked-about addition being Aaron Fisher, a young, gay, homeless activist who wore a makeshift Captain America suit while protecting runaways. Fisher's introduction grabbed headlines in mainstream media. Marvel even previewed him before the series launched, but many longtime readers felt like the comic didn't do the concept justice. Instead of exploring complex, grounded stories, readers found scenes that felt like lecture notes with speech bubbles. Critics praised it as timely and inclusive, but the conversations online told a different story, readers saying it felt like Marvel was more interested in showing off a checklist than writing a compelling Cap story. The art didn't help either. Stiff panels and generic backgrounds made each stop on Cap's journey blur together. Even Steve Rogers himself felt sidelined, with issues shifting focus so quickly between new characters that nothing stuck. By the time the final issue rolled out, the series had fizzled. No lasting characters, no memorable villains, no powerful legacy moments, just another short-lived run that Marvel quietly left behind. New X-Men, Hellfire Gala. This one was pitched as a bold crossover event where mutants would host a high-fashion, high-society gala on the mutant island of Krakoa. Red carpets, celebrity cameos, couture costumes, and apparently superhero drama somewhere in the background. At least that's what the promo promised. The gala ran across multiple titles, dragging the X-Men into a narrative that felt more like a Vogue photo shoot than a mutant saga. For longtime fans, it was jarring. Issue after issue showed beloved characters striking poses, sipping drinks, and walking runways while readers waited for stakes, tension, or conflict to actually appear. Fans quickly noticed the event was heavy on aesthetics, light on plot. The designs by Russell Dodderman were elaborate and stylish, earning praise from art critics and fashion blogs, but readers felt stranded. The actual storylines felt disjointed, full of awkward small talk, weird cameos, and almost no forward momentum for the Krakoa saga. Even the big twist, the revelation of a new X-Men lineup voted in by mutants worldwide, didn't land with much excitement. The vote itself was announced long before in a public Marvel poll, so readers already knew the outcome before turning the page. Across Marvel's line, issues labeled as part of the Hellfire Gala often read like filler. Minimal action, no real threats, just characters showing off their designer looks. Critics loved the spectacle. Fans felt disconnected, wondering why their favorite X-Men books had suddenly become fashion catalogs. By the time the event wrapped, it left barely a ripple in X-Men continuity. The next arcs moved on fast, and the Hellfire Gala quietly faded into a curious Marvel experiment, beautifully illustrated but narratively empty. Crush and Lobo. The comic was DC's attempt to give a rising anti-hero her own spotlight, and to cash in on the chaos that comes with putting the daughter of Lobo, the main man himself, center stage. On paper, this sounded wild. Crush, half-Xarnian rebel with attitude, decides she's had enough of her absentee, psychotic dad and plans a face-to-face showdown at an intergalactic prison. Perfect setup for space fights, trash talk, and mayhem. Instead, what readers got felt weirdly hollow. The series kicked off with Crush breaking up with her girlfriend and spiraled into page after page of emotional unpacking and quirky jokes that didn't land. Fans jumped into this expecting brutal action and crazy adventures. They got therapy sessions and zany quips. The artwork by Amancay Nahuelpan had style and energy, but the writing leaned hard into self-aware humor and awkward banter, often sidelining the plot. The dynamic between Crush and Lobo, which should have been sharp, sarcastic, and explosive, rarely took off. Lobo himself barely felt like the unhinged space biker fans remembered. By the time the Prison Break storyline actually kicked into gear, most readers had already checked out. Sales dropped issue to issue, and by the end of its 8-issue run, Crush and Lobo had vanished from conversation. No tie-ins, no major fallout in the DC universe, no lasting impact. It simply existed and then didn't. Harley Quinn, The Eat, Bang, Kill, Tour. After the success of the Harley Quinn animated series, DC went all in with a spin-off comic designed to capture the same chaotic energy. The Eat, Bang, Kill tour picked up right where Season 2 left off. Harley and Poison Ivy running away together after wrecking Ivy's wedding. It promised wild road trip fun, romance, and plenty of violence. At least, that's what fans were hoping for. Right from the start, the comic focused on Harley and Ivy's playful road trip, full of jokes and minor misadventures, with no real danger driving the story. And while that sounded fine in theory, readers expecting the clever, dark humor and sharp writing from the animated series didn't find it here. Instead, the dialogue felt shallow, and the jokes didn't land with the same bite. The series leaned heavily into Harley's over-the-top antics, but forgot to give her anything interesting to do. Page after page went by where nothing substantial happened, with much of the plot centered around Harley and Ivy exchanging playful quips while dodging minor inconveniences. The art by Max Sarin brought a cartoonish, bubbly style that matched the tone, but didn't resonate with all fans, especially those used to the more dynamic look of the show. Reviews praised its LGBTQ+ representation, but also noted that the comic lacked narrative drive. Even Harley's usual madness felt dialed down. By the end of its short 6-issue run, the Eat, Bang, Kill tour wrapped up without much fanfare. It never built enough momentum to become essential reading, and most fans quickly moved back to waiting for the next season of the animated show, where Harley and Ivy's story had far more spark. New Warriors. This comic never even made it to shelves, and still became one of the most hated books in Marvel history. In March 2020, Marvel dropped a trailer for a New Warriors reboot introducing 5 new characters. Within hours, the internet exploded. Trailblazer, B-Negative, Screen Time, and front and center, Snowflake and Safe Space. It read like a parody, but this was Marvel's actual lineup. Fully serious, fully official. The backlash hit instantly. YouTube downvotes piled up, Reddit threads blew up, and comic YouTubers called it the death of Marvel's dignity. The video was so ratioed, Marvel disabled comments. The creators tried to explain the concept. Snowflake and Safe Space were meant to reclaim slurs and explore trauma, but fans weren't buying it. They called it virtue-signaling nonsense wrapped in a cringe costume. But the book was never even released. After the trailer, Marvel went silent. No new previews, no digital listings. It was quietly canceled without explanation. A ghost book. The backlash kept growing as fans saw it less as a passion project and more like a boardroom brainstorm engineered to trend on Twitter. It wasn't just the names. It was how Marvel framed it as a woke team for modern youth without any actual stakes or substance. Even longtime fans of the original New Warriors felt insulted. America Chavez solo series. This series didn't just miss the mark. It set off a chain reaction of criticism that's still echoing today. When Marvel gave America Chavez her own solo run, expectations were high. She had breakout appeal from Young Avengers, was hyped as Marvel's first Latina LGBTQ+ hero, and had legit potential to lead a new wave. But the solo title that launched in 2017, that's where things unraveled. From the first issue, readers were confused. The art was inconsistent, but it was the writing that lit the match. America spoke almost entirely in hashtags, slang, and weirdly academic references. Some pages felt like a Tumblr feed, others read like a term paper. Plot points drifted, dialogue felt unnatural, and fans, even those excited for her, couldn't figure out who this version of America was supposed to be. Sales dipped fast. Issue 1, cracked the top 100, but by issue 5, it had fallen out of the top 300. Major YouTubers reviewed it with visible frustration, and the backlash spread across. It didn't help that writer Gabby Rivera was open about not being a comic reader before joining Marvel. Critics praised the bold voice. Fans said the story lacked direction and identity beyond identity itself. The series was canceled after just 12 issues. America Chavez would return in team books and eventually the MCU, but her solo run became a symbol of a bigger problem: how a great character can fall apart when the writing focuses more on slogans than substance. Ta-Nehisi Coates as Captain America and Black Panther. On paper, this should have been a slam dunk. Acclaimed writer, iconic characters, political depth. But once Coates took over Black Panther in 2016 and Captain America in 2018, something strange happened. The praise from critics soared, but the fan enthusiasm flatlined. The biggest complaint? The pacing. Both runs were heavy on monologue, light on momentum. Black Panther's Space Empire arc had sprawling philosophical debates about leadership, identity, and post-colonialism, but sometimes across 10 pages of talking. Captain America spent most of his time thinking deeply while punching less. Readers came in expecting bold action. They got lectures and inner conflict. At the same time, Coates' storytelling was respected. He brought literary weight and political edge. His Black Panther run was named one of the best comics of the year by multiple outlets. But in comic shops, fans dropped off hard after the first arc. Cap's sales dropped from 167K to under 25K by the second year. Some fans said the characters felt sidelined in their own books, like platforms for ideas, not personalities. The divide only deepened as Coates refused to pull punches, opening his Captain America run with a government overtaken by Hydra and a nation locked in ideological crisis. It wasn't subtle. Some praised it as bold. Others saw it as a one-note worldview stretched across too many issues. By the end, both series had strong hardcover sales, but monthly readers were gone. Coates left comics soon after, and fan forums still argue whether he elevated the medium or pushed it too far from its roots. Children of the Atom. Marvel billed it as the next generation of mutants, a teen squad with big X-Men energy. But when Children of the Atom finally launched in 2021, it landed like a thud. Delayed for over a year and dropping right in the middle of the Krakoa era, the book already felt out of sync. Then readers cracked it open, and the confusion really started. The story followed a group of teenagers obsessed with the X-Men, using tech to mimic their powers, a concept that immediately drew skepticism. But it was the dialogue that caused the real headache. Every character spoke like they were sponsored by TikTok. Non-stop slang, hashtags, and awkward Gen Z speak filled the pages. One panel read like it was written by someone who'd seen teenagers on a cereal box. Critics tried to spin it as youthful authenticity. Fans weren't having it. The main issue? None of the characters had real stakes. They weren't mutants. They didn't face the same struggles. They just cosplayed as X-Men, with gadgets that weren't fully explained. The tone bounced between cheesy school drama and vague superhero stuff with little payoff. Sales started modestly but dropped off quickly. Issue number 1 sold around 38,000 copies. By issue number 4, it was down to 15,000. The series ended after just 6 issues. She-Hulk 2022. Jennifer Walters has been many things: lawyer, Avenger, fourth wall breaker. But in 2022, Marvel gave her a soft reboot, and fans didn't recognize her anymore. The new She-Hulk series leaned hard into slice-of-life territory, dropping courtroom drama and superhero action in favor of romance plots, tea parties, and fashion panels. Critics applauded the tone shift, calling it charming and refreshing, but longtime fans, they weren't impressed. The new run downplayed her intelligence and strength. One issue focused on her cleaning up the apartment and gossiping with Patsy Walker. Another centered on dating woes and cupcake baking. Readers started wondering if this was still the same character who once knocked out the Thing and argued cases before cosmic judges. Social media debates erupted. Supporters defended it as a fun character study. Detractors said Marvel reduced Jen into a quirky girlfriend role, stripped of her edge. And because the comic dropped right around the Disney Plus She-Hulk show, which had its own backlash for similar reasons, the confusion only got worse. Sales were decent at launch thanks to variant covers and media hype, but interest faded fast. Within a few issues, the title dropped out of the top 100. Reviews turned mixed, and comic shops reported little pull list retention. Writer Rainbow Rowell, known for Runaways, defended the creative direction as a reset, but the disconnect with core fans lingered. Instead of empowering or evolving She-Hulk, the 2022 run sidelined what made her iconic and left many readers flipping through the pages wondering when the superhero part was going to start. Batwoman Rebirth. By 2021, DC was determined to make Batwoman a headline hero again. Kate Kane had been introduced years earlier as Bruce Wayne's cousin, an LGBTQ+ icon, and a military-trained vigilante with a grim edge. The Rebirth relaunch was supposed to bring her back to prominence, modernized for a new audience, and reflecting progressive themes more overtly. But from the opening issues, the relaunch struggled. The creative team leaned heavily into Kate's identity and trauma, making it the core of nearly every plotline, but the execution felt heavy-handed. Story arcs were bogged down in melodrama and exposition, and longtime fans quickly pointed out that Batwoman felt more like a symbol on the page than a fully fleshed-out character. The villains didn't help either. Instead of facing Gotham's elite rogues gallery or meaningful new antagonists, Batwoman was paired with uninspired, one-note adversaries that lacked menace or intrigue. Many issues revolved around inner turmoil and personal struggles that never escalated into compelling action or mystery. The art, while occasionally stylish, also failed to capture the noir vibe that made Batwoman's earlier runs feel atmospheric and distinct. Panels felt static, and fight scenes lacked impact. Sales reflected the lack of enthusiasm. The book quietly lost readers month after month, slipping from DC's must-read list and eventually closing shop without leaving much of a mark on Gotham's ever-expanding mythology. Marvel's Voices Infinity comic Snowguard. This one was created to spotlight diverse characters and creators, and in 2023, they gave Snowguard her own entry. Amka Aliak, an Inuit teen hero from Canada, first appeared in Champions back in 2018 and stood out immediately as one of Marvel's few Indigenous heroes. But when her solo comic finally arrived as part of the Voices Infinity digital series, reader reactions weren't exactly enthusiastic. Snowguard's story was meant to celebrate her cultural roots, but what fans got felt flat and oddly generic. The writing lacked energy, and dialogue was filled with exposition-heavy monologues that slowed every scene. Instead of dynamic superhero action or meaningful conflict, much of the issue played out like a travelogue, heavy on cultural explanation and light on character development. Even longtime Champions readers noticed Snowguard's vibrant, defiant personality seemed dulled. She felt more like a tour guide than a superhero, walking readers through issues of colonialism and representation in a way that felt more like a lecture than an adventure. The art didn't leave much of an impression either. Panels were minimalistic, partly due to the digital-first format, but they lacked the visual flair that might have brought Amka's powers and world to life. While critics praised Marvel for spotlighting Indigenous representation, comments from readers reflected a different vibe entirely. Most felt like the comic wasn't really written for them, or for anyone looking for a fun, exciting superhero tale. Batgirl of Burnside. When DC revamped Batgirl in the 2010s leading into the 2020s, they gave Barbara Gordon a total makeover. Not just in costume, but in tone, setting, and attitude. This was Batgirl of Burnside, a version of Babs recast as a 20-something living in a trendy, Brooklyn-style neighborhood, dealing with roommates, social media, coffee shops, and gentrification. The goal was clear: attract a younger, millennial audience by making Batgirl relatable, fresh, and quirky. But longtime fans weren't buying it. The writing leaned heavily into millennial cliches, with Barbara checking Instagram feeds between punching criminals and using emoji speak in her dialogue. Readers criticized the series for turning Batgirl into a hipster caricature, complete with awkward hashtags and relatable blog posts. Storylines revolved around influencer culture and tech startups, rather than Gotham's gritty crime underworld. For a character once known for sharp intelligence and detective skills, this run felt like a complete shift in personality, one that many fans felt didn't respect her legacy. The artwork followed suit: bright, poppy colors, flat backgrounds, and a fashion-forward aesthetic that gave Burnside a bubblegum feel, far removed from the shadowy alleys of Gotham City. While critics praised it for trying something different and progressive, many longtime readers felt disconnected from this new version of Barbara Gordon. Sales initially jumped due to curiosity and a strong marketing push, but they didn't hold. Burnside's Batgirl quietly receded from prominence as DC shifted focus elsewhere, and by the time Barbara returned to the main Bat family books, the hipster phase was largely ignored. Captain Marvel by Kelly Thompson. When Kelly Thompson took over Captain Marvel in 2019, Carol Danvers was already polarizing. The MCU had just pushed her front and center, and Marvel was determined to make her one of the publisher's flagship characters. Thompson's run lasted over 40 issues, a rare feat for a modern solo Marvel title, but despite its longevity, the fan base stayed divided. From the outset, the writing leaned into portraying Carol as near invincible and uncompromising, but that characterization quickly drew criticism. Many readers felt Carol came across as too perfect, always winning, always right, and rarely showing vulnerability. The villains didn't help. Throughout the run, Carol was paired with forgettable antagonists who never felt like serious threats, leading to stories that lacked tension or stakes. Fans who stuck with the series noticed a pattern: slow plots, predictable conflicts, and frequent dialogue heavy on affirmations and pep talks, but light on memorable moments. Even major arcs like The Last Avenger, where Carol fought other heroes, felt mechanical. The art fluctuated from arc to arc, with a rotating roster of artists giving the book an inconsistent look. While individual covers often stood out, the interior art rarely elevated the material. Despite these issues, Marvel kept pushing Carol in the spotlight: crossovers, variant covers, and endless marketing. The disconnect was obvious. Sales numbers trended downward even as Marvel doubled down on her status as a premier character. By 2022, the run wrapped up quietly. Carol Danvers was still prominent in Marvel's larger universe, but her solo book struggled to keep readers engaged throughout its entire run. The legacy of Thompson's tenure? A title that lasted longer than expected but rarely sparked excitement. A marathon of mediocrity that didn't quite deliver the defining Captain Marvel era Marvel was hoping for. Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan later solo runs, 2000s. When Kamala Khan debuted in 2014, she became an instant success. The early Ms. Marvel issues were widely praised for their heart, humor, and relatability, blending superhero action with an authentic coming-of-age story set in Jersey City. But as the 2000s rolled around, things changed. By the time her later solo runs arrived, reader enthusiasm had cooled. Kamala's newer books felt stale. The same high school struggles and cultural identity beats kept repeating, but without the spark that made them feel fresh the first time. Plots grew thin, often revolving around minor villains and low-stakes conflicts, while Kamala herself seemed stuck in a holding pattern. Fan criticism wasn't just about repetition. It was about a shift in tone. Dialogue became clunky, with heavy-handed messaging overtaking character-driven moments, the charm of Kamala's. Earlier adventures faded as later issues read more like they were written to fulfill a checklist than to tell exciting superhero stories. The art varied wildly across arcs, with some issues offering vibrant panels and others looking rushed and flat. Even as Marvel pushed Kamala into team books, crossovers, and prepped her MCU launch, her solo runs kept losing steam. Sales reflected that fatigue. New #1 issues launched but quickly dropped in the charts, often ending after short runs. Fans who loved Kamala in her early appearances increasingly voiced that the character deserved better material than what her later books delivered. By the time her MCU debut was nearing, Kamala's comic adventures had lost much of their buzz. Ironheart. When Marvel introduced Riri Williams, they weren't just building a new hero, they were replacing one. Tony Stark was dead, and in his place stood a 15-year-old MIT genius in a suit of homemade armor. The debut came with major buzz, but the execution? That's where the turbulence started. Fans didn't reject Riri because she was young or black. The frustration came from how fast she was pushed to the front. No build-up, no deep arcs, no struggle. She built armor in her dorm, got Stark's blessing via AI hologram, and suddenly she was headlining as Ironheart. Many readers felt like they were told to care before they even had a chance to know who she was. The solo series launched in 2018, written by Eve Ewing, and had some solid opening numbers, but the dialogue leaned heavy on exposition and moral lessons. The supporting cast was thin, and villains barely lasted 2 issues. While Riri was praised as a role model, critics and fans alike noted she lacked personality beyond being smart and defiant. Sales slipped quickly. Issue #1 broke 40K in orders. By issue #5, it was below 20K. The comic ended after 12 issues, and Riri was shuffled into team books like Champions, where she was often overshadowed by stronger characters like Miles Morales or Kamala Khan. I Am Not Starfire. This one didn't just spark criticism, it became an online punching bag. When DC announced I Am Not Starfire, a young adult graphic novel about Mandy, the rebellious goth daughter of the iconic Teen Titan, fans were immediately skeptical. She hated superheroes, rejected her mom's legacy, and spent most of the book sulking through high school drama. The title told you everything. She wasn't Starfire and didn't want to be. Written by Mariko Tamaki and illustrated by Yoshi Yoshitani, the book was framed as a coming-of-age story. But many readers saw it as something else, a self-insert rant wrapped in a cape. Mandy looked and talked like a version of the author, and Starfire, once a confident, powerful warrior, was now written like a clueless, bubbly embarrassment. The mother-daughter dynamic felt forced, and the superhero elements barely registered. Once preview pages dropped, the backlash was instant. YouTubers and Twitter threads torched it. The book was flooded with 1-star reviews on Goodreads and Amazon. Critics called it bold and emotionally raw. Fans called it condescending and anti-fan. DC stayed quiet. No strong marketing push followed. Sales were soft, and it didn't chart high on major lists. Some comic shops didn't even stock it. And when readers did get their hands on it, the takeaway was clear. This wasn't a love letter to the Titans. It was a rejection of everything they stood for. Marvel Voices and Pride. On launch, it sounded like a win, a series of one-shot anthologies spotlighting Marvel's diverse characters and creators. Titles like Marvel's Voices, Pride, Indigenous Voices, and Identity were meant to uplift underrepresented groups. But once the issues hit shelves, the celebration turned into criticism. Each issue featured a handful of mini-tales, 5 to 7 pages each, with limited plot and heavy-handed dialogue. Some were heartfelt tributes, others felt like checklists. Characters like Iceman, Chavez, and Northstar showed up often, but didn't do much. The focus leaned more on making statements than building arcs. Reviewers praised the initiative. Readers started calling it diversity marketing in comic form. The Pride editions in particular drew backlash. Some fans accused Marvel of spotlighting queer characters just for visibility during June, with no follow-up across the year. Others pointed out how some characters featured, like Somnis, were introduced in one anthology and then never used again. Online, the divide was clear. Some hailed it as necessary representation. Others said it felt shallow, a product built to trend, not connect. And while the variant covers sold decently, many retailers reported that readers weren't adding the issues to their pull lists. Marvel continued the line annually, but rarely expanded these characters into solo titles or mainline teams. The intention was clear. The execution left fans divided. Marvel Voices wanted to be a celebration, but for many, it read more like a marketing memo. Representation matters, but readers wanted it wrapped in compelling, lasting stories. And that's where these books struggled to land. Iceman. For over 50 years, Bobby Drake was one of Marvel's original X-Men, a jokester, a hothead, and never short on confidence. But in 2015, Marvel took him in a completely new direction. During a conversation with teenage Jean Grey, adult Iceman was suddenly outed as gay. It wasn't a character arc, it wasn't foreshadowed. Jean read his mind and told him. That scene kicked off one of the most controversial retcons in X-Men history. Fans were stunned, not by the idea itself, but by how it happened. Bobby had a long history of relationships with women, and the change came without buildup. Critics praised it as progressive. Longtime readers questioned the logic. Was it character development or editorial decision? In 2017, Marvel gave Iceman a solo series written by Sina Grace. The book focused on Bobby exploring his identity, dating, and coming out to friends. But the stories leaned hard into awkward humor, preachy tone shifts, and panels that felt more like tweets than dialogue. The action took a back seat. Even among readers who supported the change, many said the writing felt disconnected from who Iceman used to be. Sales didn't hold. The series was canceled after 11 issues. A second volume launched later, but ran for just 5 more before ending again. Grace later wrote a Medium post claiming Marvel gave him no support and even blamed him when fans pushed back. He said he was left out of internal meetings and told not to engage negative reviews. Today, Iceman's legacy as a character is still intact, but the solo run is remembered more for its rollout than its impact. Faith. When Valiant launched Faith Herbert into her own solo series in 2016, it came with high hopes and heavy praise. A plus-size superhero who was smart, joyful, and geeky, comic outlets called her a refreshing new voice. The concept had promise, but the writing never rose to meet it. Faith was introduced as part of Valiant's Harbinger team, a fan favorite with real personality. But in her solo run, something changed. The action slowed, the villains turned goofy, and the scripts leaned heavily into blogger speak and media satire. One arc featured her fighting a reality TV villain, another centered around celebrity crushes and social media manipulation. It was less about being a superhero and more about quirky commentary. While critics applauded the body-positive messaging, fans started fading fast. Many praised the representation, but said the plots felt like filler. Faith was often written more like a brand ambassador than a hero. Dialogue focused on positivity over stakes. Real threats were rare, and readers who wanted her to be more than a symbol got stuck in stories that barely moved. The series ran through multiple relaunches and mini-arcs, but it never expanded into the bigger Valiant universe like it was supposed to. Sales were modest early on, but they never grew. Despite variant covers and promotional pushes, Faith never became the anchor character the company hoped for. By 2018, Faith's spotlight had dimmed. Her last solo arc faded out without buzz. No major crossovers, no resurrection in Valiant's relaunches. She wasn't just underused, she was shelved. The pitch was strong, the message was solid, but when it came to writing stories that could stand beside the industry's best, Faith didn't have the weight to hold her place. Undeniably, comics keep changing, but are they still telling stories people actually want to read? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Naomi. DC put all its chips on Naomi. Brand new hero, all new mythology. She was positioned as the next big thing in the DC universe. Brian Michael Bendis and David F. Walker co-created her with full backing from editorial, launching in 2019 under the Wonder Comics imprint. And for a second, it worked. Issue number 1 sold out. DC gave her a JLA invite by her 6th issue. But here's where it got weird. The first 6-issue arc spent most of its time on vague teases. Naomi lived in a quiet town, had adoptive parents, and mysterious headaches. A Superman flyby caused some kind of disruption. Then came backstory, then more backstory, then another info dump. By the time her powers actually activated, readers had flipped through entire issues of exposition, dream sequences, and characters saying things like, "You're special, but not ready." The book got a season 2 in 2022, but the drop-off was brutal. Issue number 1 sold less than half of what season 1 did. Fans said Naomi had no defined personality, just constant reminders of how important she might be later. Dialogue was clunky, pacing crawled, and while her design and powers looked cool, there was never a solid villain or plot to anchor her. Then the CW show dropped, and tanked. Bad reviews, low ratings, and cancellation after 1 season. Instead of boosting the comic, it buried the brand. Today, Naomi barely appears in team books and hasn't had a solo issue since. The new Champions. Marvel rebooted Champions in 2020 with a clear mission: turn their teen squad into symbols of modern activism. The team, Kamala Khan, Miles Morales, Riri Williams, and others, was thrown into a storyline about Kamala's Law, a national crackdown on underage superheroes. The government labeled them as threats. Protest scenes filled the pages. Hashtags, banners, and speeches took over the panels. By the end of issue 1, fans knew something was off. The new volume launched during a tense real-world political climate. Instead of easing readers in, the book jumped headfirst into social commentary, skipping the fun, fast-paced team dynamic that made earlier Champions arcs work. Pages were loaded with exposition. Characters delivered monologues mid-battle. Riri gave TED Talks. Kamala sounded like a spokesperson for fictional civil rights reform. Even Viv Vision got in on it with AI ethics. The art by Luciano Vecchio had energy, but the script dragged it down. Critics called it timely. Fans called it homework. Reviews highlighted a bigger issue. Every team member felt like a walking message. They weren't solving mysteries, fighting villains, or evolving as characters. They were doing press conferences and outrunning curfews. Sales dropped steadily from issue to issue. By number 5, it was near cancellation territory. Marvel didn't even build a major arc around it afterward. No tie-ins, no spin-offs, just quiet fade-out. Wonder Woman, Tempest tossed. DC released Tempest Tossed in June 2020 as part of its YA graphic novel line. Written by best-selling author Laurie Halsey Anderson, it reimagined Wonder Woman as a teenage refugee. On her 16th birthday, Diana gets caught in a storm and swept off Themyscira, straight into modern-day US immigration chaos. From the first few pages, it was clear this wasn't going to be a story about gods, monsters, or invisible jets. Diana gets detained at a refugee camp. She's processed by Border Patrol. She meets trafficked children and activist social workers. For readers expecting Amazonian action or any ties to classic Wonder Woman mythology, this felt like reading a completely unrelated political drama where Diana just happened to be the lead. Critics praised the grounded tone. Fans, especially longtime Wonder Woman readers, were confused. Themyscira was gone within 10 pages. No powers, no armor, just public transit, bureaucracy, and real-world metaphors stacked onto every panel. The art by Leila Del Duca had a sketchbook softness, which fit the YA angle, but didn't deliver on any of the iconic visuals that fans associate with Diana. Lasso of Truth? Absent. Olympian stakes? Nowhere in sight. Despite media buzz and strong pre-orders, Tempest Tossed didn't stick with readers. It faded from the conversation within weeks and hasn't been referenced in any major DC title since. Green Lantern? Far Sector. When DC introduced Joe Malign in Far Sector, the pitch was bold. A brand new Green Lantern, an outsider investigating a murder mystery in a far-off cyberpunk city. Writer N.K. Jemisin, a Hugo Award-winning novelist, led the series with art by Jamal Campbell. On paper, it sounded like prestige storytelling. In comic shops, readers had questions. Right from the jump, Joe's ring didn't work like the others. It didn't need to recharge. It had limited energy but no battery. It operated on vibes and backstory. Readers combed through issues trying to understand the rules. And DC didn't offer much help. The focus wasn't on Lantern Corps lore. It was politics, identity, and commentary about surveillance states and emotional regulation. Joe had presence. Her design was sleek. Her backstory involved police brutality, protests, and military service, heavy topics for a superhero debut, but every issue was loaded with dense dialogue, internal monologues, and philosophical debates. The murder mystery slowed to a crawl, and action scenes took a back seat. By the time Far Sector wrapped, reviews were split. Critics praised it as ambitious. Fans said they were exhausted. When Joe later joined the main Green Lantern run in 2021, sales were already dropping. Hal, John, and Kyle got shoved aside. Joe took center stage, but readers didn't follow. The series didn't connect with longtime Lantern fans or new readers. Joe was built up to be a next-gen icon. Instead, she became a symbol of what happens when you strip away everything familiar and forget to replace it with something equally compelling. Nubia and the Amazons. In 2021, DC gave Nubia her long-overdue spotlight. The first Black Amazon, a legacy character dating back to the 70s, now promoted as Queen of Themyscira with her own series, her own court, and a big role in Future State. The timing lined up with DC's push for broader representation, and the company leaned in. Variant covers, media buzz, critical applause before issue 1 even dropped. The book opened with a magical well of souls, literally. New Amazons were emerging from it with fresh identities and backstories, including trans and queer characters. The premise had scope, but readers looking for epic stakes and sharp plotting didn't get far before the pace hit a wall. Issue after issue stalled in palace dialogue. Page after page focused on internal debates, gentle affirmations, and cautious leadership. Themyscira became a discussion circle. Characters stood around telling each other how important they were, without doing much. There was no real villain, no crisis, just metaphors wrapped in long speeches. The art by Aletha Martinez had warmth, but the panels felt static. Fight scenes were brief and forgettable. Even Nubia, meant to carry the whole thing, had little agency. Fans who wanted to see her rise as a warrior queen watched her deliver speeches and nod through ceremonies. Sales dipped quickly after launch. By issue 6, the book faded from DC's mainline slate. Nubia still appears in crossovers, but the solo title that was supposed to redefine her legacy ended with barely a ripple. Somnis. In 2021, Marvel hyped up a brand new character for its Pride anthology, his name being Somnis, a gay, time-bending mutant from the past who'd been erased from X-Men history until now. Before anyone read a panel, press releases were everywhere. Outlets called him a milestone. Marvel ran spotlight features. The costume was flashy, the quotes were carefully curated. It seemed like a marketing event. Then the issue dropped. Somnis appeared in a 7-page story written by Steve Orlando. He used dream powers, had a mysterious past with Daken, and got welcomed into Krakoa. It looked like the start of something big. Fans waited for the follow-up. It never came. Somnis didn't get a solo. He didn't show up in X-Men titles. He wasn't added to any teams. He didn't even cameo during mutant-wide crossover events. Readers started asking why Marvel introduced a character with fanfare and interviews, then forgot he existed. Behind the scenes, even the creative team seemed surprised. In interviews months later, Orlando admitted there were no long-term plans. Somnis was introduced specifically for the Pride special, and that was it. Critics praised the intention. Readers pointed out the pattern. Marvel had now introduced multiple LGBTQ+ characters in anthologies, hyped them briefly, and let them disappear. Somnis became the case study. Future State Gotham. DC's Future State event promised bold reinventions. In Gotham, Bruce Wayne was presumed dead, the city was under authoritarian control, and the Batmantle had passed to Jace Fox, Lucius Fox's son. Future State. Gotham picked up that timeline and tried to carry the torch. What fans got instead was grayscale artwork, minimalist dialogue, and a Batbook that barely flickered. The entire series was printed in black and white, not stylized noir, and just black and white. The decision was pitched as a creative experiment. For many readers, it read like an unfinished draft. Gotham's usually moody skyline turned flat. Fight scenes felt weightless. And for a story about rebellion, nothing ever looked urgent. Jace Fox as Batman had promise. His suit was modern, and his approach was different. But over 18 issues, readers struggled to connect. The scripts were sparse. Plots looped around bureaucracy, drones, and the magistrate, a police force that somehow made every issue feel slower. Bruce eventually returned to the story, but even that didn't boost interest. The biggest problem was that it felt isolated. Future State. Gotham didn't tie into other Batbooks. There were no major villains, no crossover hooks, and no real evolution. Jace had a spotlight, but nothing to do with that stuck. The book ran longer than expected, but without momentum or conversation. When it finally ended, DC didn't spin Jace into a flagship title. The Fox family storyline faded, and the Gotham readers remembered went back to Bruce, Dick, and Damian. Reptile. Marvel gave Reptile his first solo series in 2021. He'd shown up before in Avengers Academy, made a few appearances in cartoons, and had a cool hook, a teenage hero who could turn into dinosaurs. Easy sell, right? Instead, the book launched quietly, limped through 4 issues, and vanished without a trace. From the start, it was clear the creative team wanted to highlight Reptile's Latinx identity. The story centered around family, heritage, and discovering the origins of his powers. But the superhero part was barely there. The villains were forgettable, action scenes felt rushed, and most of the dialogue was exposition about identity and ancient magic. The tone leaned into after-school special territory. Panels were loaded with narration. Reptile didn't evolve much. He already had powers. He didn't face a major threat. The stakes were low across the board. Even the visuals handled by Enid Balam had charm, but lacked the punch Marvel fans were used to. By issue 2, fans online were calling it lukewarm. By issue 4, the series ended quietly without setup for anything bigger. No team invites, no crossovers, no tease for future arcs. Marvel made no announcement about where Reptile would go next, and readers didn't ask. Monkey Prince. DC launched Monkey Prince in 2022 with serious ambition. Inspired by the legendary Journey to the West, Marcus' son was introduced as the son of the Monkey King, a trickster hero with shape-shifting powers and ancient magic. Jean Lewin Yang wrote it. Bernard Chung handled the art. DC promoted it as part of their Lunar New Year celebration. The plan was clear. Global mythology meets the DC universe. But once the book hit shelves, things got weird. The series tried to juggle ancient Chinese folklore, high school hijinks, and cameos from Batman, Aquaman, and other DC regulars. The tone bounced between prank comedy and generational trauma. Readers couldn't tell if it was a full-on epic or a sidekick origin with jokes. One issue had Marcus battling shadow demons. The next had him dodging detention. Even with stunning character designs and some sharp visuals, the plot meandered. The pacing stalled in the middle arcs. Dialogue leaned on awkward teen banter and exposition about magical bloodlines. The crossover moments with Batman and Shazam didn't add much. They just reminded fans that Monkey Prince was floating on the outskirts of a universe that didn't really need him. 12 issues came and went. Sales weren't strong, buzz didn't build. The book wrapped with a mild cliffhanger, but DC didn't announce any follow-up. No tie-ins, no miniseries, no event. Thunderbolts. In 2022, Marvel brought back the Thunderbolts name, a title with decades of history usually known for edgy lineups, reformed villains, and unpredictable energy. This time the team was led by Hawkeye, backed by characters like America Chavez, Spectrum, Power Man, and a new telepath named Gutson Glory. Marvel sold it as a fresh take. New York City needed a new official team after Wilson Fisk outlawed vigilantes in Devil's Reign. The Thunderbolts were supposed to fill that void, but the series had a problem right away. No one felt like a Thunderbolt. The lineup lacked grit. There was no internal conflict, no moral gray area, and no standout rogue among them. The mission boiled down to doing good in the public eye, with managers, press conferences, and stage directions. Clint Barton cracked jokes. America looked bored. The new characters barely got fleshed out. Art by Sean Isaacsy was clean and dynamic, but the tone clashed with the legacy. Instead of street-level chaos, fans got choreographed action and PR debriefs. Writer Jim Zub leaned into sitcom-style banter, but the stakes never escalated. Each issue felt like a soft reset. Mission, punchline, done. Sales didn't hold. The book ran 5 issues, then closed up shop without a major cliffhanger. None of the new characters broke out. The Thunderbolts name returned and disappeared, without leaving a mark. XMen Green. The same year, 2022, Marvel released XMen Green as a digital-first mini on Marvel Unlimited. It starred Nature Girl, a background mutant with plant-based powers, who snapped, literally. After witnessing environmental destruction, she stabbed a man in the neck with a plastic straw and went rogue across the globe. That was page 1. The story followed Nature Girl and fellow mutant Curse as they launched an eco-extremist crusade against humanity's pollution. They stole a Krakoan gate, traveled across countries, and took down oil rigs, meat factories, and corporate offices, all in the name of mutant kind and the environment. But instead of tension or nuance, fans got a cartoonish morality tale. Every human character was written like a stock villain. Dialogue was stuffed with slogans. There was little pushback from other mutants, and the series treated Nature Girl's spiral like a quirky side mission. The digital format didn't help. Each issue was short and structured for scrolling, not pacing. Scenes cut quickly, fights were minimal, and stakes never escalated. Art by Alberto Foch and others was serviceable, but never elevated the premise. Longtime X-Men fans called it one of the strangest Krakoa-era stories, not because of the concept, but because of how disconnected it felt from the main books. The series ended quietly. Nature Girl was captured, Curse got a slap on the wrist, and XMen Green vanished from Marvel's roadmap. Blood Syndicate Season 1. This one was a cornerstone of the original Milestone line in the 90s, a gritty, unapologetic super team formed by survivors of the Big Bang event in Dakota. Gang members turned meta-humans. Real stakes, raw attitude. This time, Season 1 came with a modern relaunch, written by Jeffrey Thorne with art by Chris Cross and Will Quintana. Everything about the pitch screamed momentum, updated designs, a veteran writer who worked on Green Lantern, and a clear mission to bring Blood Syndicate into the current era. But when readers cracked it open, something was missing. The new version leaned heavily into world building but left tension on the back burner. Much of the early run focused on philosophy, dialogue-heavy debates, and backstory catch-up. The team didn't come together until deep into the arc. Meanwhile, the street-level energy that made the original series feel dangerous got cleaned up into controlled conversations. The art had moments of flair, but never pushed beyond serviceable. Action scenes lacked grit. Characters like Wise Sun and Tech 9 returned, but without the raw edge that defined them. New characters weren't given space to stand out, and even fans familiar with Milestone lore had trouble finding the hook. Sales were quiet, buzz faded. Season 1 wrapped after 6 issues with no announcement of a follow-up. Static and Icon got more attention, Blood Syndicate got left behind, and that's it. Now to you, if these comics were trying to reshape the future, what does it say when readers keep turning back to the past? Are fans rejecting change, or just craving stories that actually hit harder than the headlines? Share your thoughts in the comment section below as you leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.